Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Black Adam from 2022. Or, well, it was released this year, but apparently it's one of those quarantine movies that was supposed to release like a year and a half earlier. It's neither here nor there. Some of you will remember prior comments of mine about both the DC and the Marvel universes, and may have watched my video that I did about Shazam and how I was a little bit more middling on it than most people, but thought it was okay and one of the better DC films from that era. And my hope beyond reason was that this was going to be a decent film. Not a good film, just a decent one. With it being connected to Shazam in a sort of indirect fashion, and being sort of more in that realm, as well as being made in 2022, I had hoped that DC had finally gotten some decent footing on what is working and what isn't working in the DCU, and how to make a decent superhero film. And this is just another nail in the DCEU coffin. It keeps rattling the coffin, and we keep putting nails in this coffin. But for some reason, it's still rattling. The movie is bad. The movie does basically everything wrong that every other superhero film does. Its only saving grace is that its editing is not quite as bad as some of them. Its visual spectacle is not quite as ugly and horrible as some of them. Its writing is not quite as awful and trite as some of the other movies. It's just barely not as bad as some of them. But it pulls some of the worst parts from so many other, both DC and Marvel films, that it's worthless. It really is. There's nothing to see here. This could be compared to a lot of different superhero films. I think the most apt comparison is going to be the Justice League. Because it's going to be Justice League and Suicide Squad, because this is a film I didn't realize this going in, but this is an ensemble movie with a bunch of different heroes in it, which is weird. Not necessarily because you can't do that, but because it can't be all of the ensemble's first movie unless you're going to focus on the whole ensemble. The problem is, this film is ostensibly focused on the character of Black Adam, who, I should note, I don't know much about the character at all, aside from what I just briefly looked up. He's apparently mostly an anti-hero and or villain, so I have no idea what they intend to do with him long term, and there are definitely some hooks in here that are suggesting they want him to be a long-term character. I don't know how they intend to do that at all, let alone in keeping with any version of him in comics. That's neither here nor there, because the issues are much, much broader than that. This film has all the problems that Justice League and Suicide Squad had in terms of not establishing characters meaningfully, not giving them depth of character to be interesting, not establishing their powers, their stakes, their wants and needs, basically doing no character development for any of the characters, whether that's the supers or the non-supers or whatever. And it's most glaring that within the first 20 minutes of the film, I was repeatedly saying, who am I supposed to be rooting for here? Because everybody is bad. Everybody is, all sides of the argument are uninteresting, undeveloped, and are presented in the like film framing devices and the writing framing devices as bad people, like as they're both wrong. I'm going to do some minor spoilers here. Don't worry about it. I promise you I'm not ruining anything. Black Adam is resurrected from this ancient place, and he is immediately met by a bunch of other supers. We don't know anything about him, and we don't know anything about them. Basically, there is a pre-roll that suggests that Black Adam is some historical hero from an ancient era, and that surely he will come back to defend the oppressed people who are in the same place they were when he was around. Except for that is immediately undercut both by narrative beats within the core story there, as well as the arrival of these other characters who are framed. It's the Justice Society, which is not just something made up, but the way it is framed is basically like, oh, it's the X-Men. Sorry, it just is. The way that's not who they are in comics. The Justice Society is real, and they have their own things going on, but the framing here looks exactly like the second series of X-Men, the Young X-Men. It looks like that. It's the scrappy young X-Men trying to get their like group together, except for then no character development is done. We don't know who anybody is. We don't know what their relationships are to each other, other than they're not complete strangers. We don't know what their powers are or their resiliences or anything like that. So you can't really do anything meaningful in the action scenes because they're just making it up as they go along. Like, I don't know. Is that guy getting punched going to kill him or not? Maybe he's going to get punched 5,000 times and it won't be a problem. Or maybe he'll get punched once and die. So I have no frame of reference for any of this. And Black Adam is framed as this, like, both a savior character and as, like, this sort of agent of pure violence who doesn't know how to do anything, doesn't know how to resolve anything in any way other than violence. But then these other guys are framed in the narrative as invaders, where they're coming to a place they're not wanted to fight a guy who is supposed to be the savior, but they're also have some good arguments for why they're there. And you would think this would probably synthesize into some sort of back and forth about who's really right and is there a compromise to be made. And you'd think it would go there, but it doesn't. It just sort of, all of that tension and any sides being taken just sort of, I don't even want to say it dissolves into the meat of the story. It just, you see chunks of it break off at random as you're, like, metaphorically going down the road. Like, chunks of it are just falling off and you hear the noise and it's just like, was that plot point important? Were we going to do something with that? They're like, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. We're just moving. We're moving so that we can have more action scenes. And this movie is chock full of action scenes. Too many action scenes. I would say too many action scenes, except for when it's not doing action scenes, it's doing horrible dialogue with unlikable characters, unrelatable, unlikable, annoying, and unestablished characters, where, like, the most compelling character is like the comic relief uncle is the most compelling character, who is like tertiary at best. Because he actually has a little bit of life, human life to him that makes you want to feel for him. And the actual stakes of his life because he's a normal human being. So meanwhile, we're just going down this road, trying to hold something together where we have repeated action scenes that escalate and de-escalate at a moment's notice, go on for way too long. All the scenes go on for too long and the movie goes on for too long. It is over 2 hours. And the action scenes are just ugly. It's just 10 minutes at a time of 99% CGI flash and bang to make it seem like there's some meaningful combat going on. And really, if I didn't know any better, I would think this was like a demo reel for a special effects company for like, look what we can do. That is made further worse by the fact that in the absence of any character development, you start making associations with these characters to other things you've seen. And you slowly or quickly realize that all of them are just slight twists on things on characters you've already seen. Normally, this is not that surprising. You know, it's, for want of a better phrase, comics are a very incestuous narrative where there's a lot of people trading, either mimicking each other, especially between Marvel and DC, mimicking each other's characters, or making small tweaks, or even just out and out like making characters that make fun of the other people's characters. So none of that is necessarily a problem because those things still work and can still be compelling. But the problem is when the special effects tell you you're watching somebody else's movie. The earliest and most glaring version of this is when, what was his name? I can't even remember the names of the characters. The character Dr. Fate does a little wave of his hands and like move around thing, and and they do a special effect around him as he like changes the scenery, and it's like, oh, you're just Doctor Strange. And then he does some other things later, and it's like, oh, you're Doctor Strange plus Iron Man, and that character is just Deadpool plus Ant-Man, and that character is just Storm and Psylocke, and that character that character is just Hawkeye and I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's all like, visually, this movie is telling you it is the same, even when there are things that differentiate them. And because there are no character establishments beforehand, there's nothing to tell you that isn't what you're seeing. So it's just, as you can tell, I'm getting a little riled up about it because it's just offensive to the senses, where we had this reckoning in the superhero movies and in movies in general, where there were some overturn for what was acceptable and what was the like baseline for what was a reasonable superhero movie. And I've had my criticisms throughout the entire run of the MCU, but generally the MCU doesn't stumble too far from making the decent thing. DC, meanwhile, has just keeps like barely edging something in. The Suicide Squad from last year is extremely good. Go watch my video on that one. But like, aside from, oops, we accidentally let the director have full creative control and he made an actually good film, there's very little redeeming here, and I can't tell that DC or anyone related to the DCEU has learned anything from any of their mistakes. So it doesn't help further that all of the visual effects, all the audio effects, even the casting seems overdone. It's just that. It's just ugly. It's doing all of the things wrong that all the other DC and some of the MCU films are doing. Like I'm gonna raffle through these just because I'm just gonna list off all the things that are wrong. So, the narrative is bad. It's thin on the ground. It's not telling you anything. Nobody is a compelling character. The characters don't say anything meaningful. They don't have any characterization of their own. They don't seem to have any apparent stakes. Their powers are unclear. Their personal motivations are who they work for, why they're doing what they're doing. Any of that basically not there. Sides change at a moment's notice so that stakes are there just to keep tension at the level where the movie wants it to be, regardless of whether that's actually a valid place for the tension level to be. because further, the plot as it runs through the whole thing has no consistent sense of what it is trying to accomplish. Is it a redemption story? Is it an origin story? Is it a clash of a bunch of different supers? Unclear, even at the end, completely unclear. And the way those allegiances change are purely based on the bad characterization or lack thereof, such that the characters can just change on a dime. The film is ugly. It's ugly through and through. A lot of the CGI looks like maybe second pass, definitely not finish pass. The pacing of the fight scenes that all that CGI takes place in is awful. The music has its moments where it thinks it's about to do something smart, and then it just lets out a loud and wet fart to let you know that it has nothing interesting to do, much like the original Suicide Squad, which just did a word association game with the names of its songs. The sound overall is just ugly and horrible. The costuming is acceptable, but mostly CGI in the first place, so it's kind of hard to fuck it up more than just the model that they slapped into their CG work that they were doing. And as much as it's not hashed together as in editing as badly as some of the other DCU films, it's still falling apart at the seams, and it's only marginally more visible than Suicide Squad. It is slightly less dark, but is still way too dark to see. If you were between this and Shazam, watch Shazam instead. Even for all my complaints about it, it is a vastly better film and much less annoying and much less boring. Anyway, I'm going to stop myself before I go on too long and just rage about this for 40 minutes. I've been the Social Solipsist. Thank you for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched, and I'll see you guys next time.